The massive space station Concordia floated in the void between 12 star systems. Its metal walls stretched for kilometers in every direction. Inside, representatives from 12 different alien species worked together to keep peace in their part of the galaxy. The Galactic Council of Civilizations had existed for over 3,000 years. The oldest members were the Alterans, tall beings with 4 arms and silver skin who spoke in musical tones. They had built the first starships when most other species still lived in caves. The Zephyrians came next, bird-like creatures with colorful feathers who could fly even in the station's artificial gravity. Their memory was perfect, and they kept all the Council's records. The Mindari were perhaps the strangest members. They looked like floating jellyfish made of light, and they could read thoughts if someone let them. They served as judges when disputes got too heated. The Kethai resembled giant spiders but were the best traders in the galaxy. Their webs of business deals connected every world in council space. For thousands of years, these ancient species had solved problems the same way. They would meet in the Great Council Chamber, a round room with seats arranged in a perfect circle. Each species had their own way of speaking, their own customs, their own ideas about right and wrong. When conflicts arose, they would debate for months or even years until they found a solution everyone could accept. This system worked well for a long time. Wars were rare. Trade flowed freely between worlds. Different species learned from each other and grew stronger together. The Council became a symbol of peace and cooperation that other parts of the galaxy looked up to. But then everything changed when the humans arrived. 200 years ago, a small fleet of human ships had appeared at the edge of Council space. The humans were young compared to the other species. They had only been traveling between stars for a few centuries. Their technology was crude. Their ships looked rough and practical rather than elegant. Most Council members expected them to be simple primitives who might make useful servants or workers. The humans proved them wrong very quickly. During their first Council meeting, the humans listened quietly while the ancient species debated a trade dispute that had been going on for 50 years. The Alterans wanted to use their traditional meditation methods. The Zephyrians insisted on following historical precedent. The Mindari suggested a complex philosophical solution that would take decades to implement. Then the human representative, a middle-aged woman named Elena Vasquez, stood up. She spoke in simple, clear words that everyone could understand. She suggested a solution that was so obvious, so practical, that the other species wondered why they had never thought of it before. The dispute was resolved in 3 days. Word spread quickly through council space. These newcomers could solve problems that had stumped the wisest minds for generations. They approached every challenge with fresh eyes and creative thinking. Where other species saw impossible barriers, humans saw interesting puzzles to solve. The humans brought more than just new ideas. They carried themselves differently than the ancient species. The Alterans were formal and ceremonious. The Zephyrians were proud of their perfect traditions. The Mindari spoke in riddles and philosophical terms, but humans were direct, friendly, and eager to help. They would stay up all night working on solutions to other species' problems. They shared their discoveries freely, never asking for payment or special treatment. When the Kethai faced a plague that was killing their young, human doctors worked alongside Kethai healers until they found a cure. When the Zephyrians lost contact with one of their colony worlds, human engineers fixed their communication systems and asked for nothing in return. Most surprising of all, humans seemed to understand every species they met. They could make the proud Alterans feel respected while joking with the practical Kethai. They mediated disputes between species that had barely spoken to each other for centuries. Somehow humans could find common ground where none had existed before. The Council's productivity increased dramatically. Problems that would have taken years to solve were handled in weeks. New technologies developed by human scientists were shared freely, making life better for everyone. Human diplomats prevented 3 different wars through careful negotiation and compromise. Within 50 years, humans had become essential to how the Council worked. They served on every major committee. Their ships patrolled the borders alongside the ancient fleets. Human colonies spread throughout Council space, becoming centers of trade and learning. Other species began sending their children to study at human universities. Dr. Sarah Chen, who became the human ambassador 30 years ago, was especially respected. She had a gift for seeing the heart of any problem and finding solutions that satisfied everyone involved. Even the most stubborn Alteran elders would listen when she spoke. The Mindari considered her wisdom almost equal to their own ancient philosophers. But success came with a price that few noticed at first. The other species began to rely on humans for everything. When faced with a difficult decision, they would wait to hear what the humans suggested before forming their own opinions. The ancient races started to see humans as useful problem solvers rather than equal partners. In their minds, humans were brilliant children who needed guidance from their older, wiser neighbors. This attitude showed itself in small ways at first. Human representatives were given seats near the back of the council chamber, instead of in the circle with the founding species. When humans suggested new policies, the ancient races would praise their creativity, while quietly changing the details to fit their own preferences. Human colonies were allowed to grow, but only in systems that the older species didn't want for themselves. The humans noticed these slights, but chose not to complain. They believed that patience and good work would eventually earn them the respect they deserved. They continued to serve faithfully, solving problems and keeping peace throughout council space. As the years passed, the ancient species grew more comfortable with their arrangement. They had the best of both worlds, all the benefits of human innovation and energy, combined with their own traditional authority and status. They began to think of humans as permanent junior partners who would always be grateful for the chance to serve alongside their betters. The Alterans spoke of humans as promising youngsters who might achieve wisdom in a few thousand years. The Zephyrians filed human achievements under interesting primitive innovations in their records. Even the Kethai, who profited greatly from human trade networks, treated them as useful but ultimately replaceable business partners. None of the ancient species stopped to consider what might happen if the humans ever decided they were tired of being treated as second-class citizens. The thought never occurred to them that these primitive youngsters might have other options, other places to go, other things to do with their remarkable abilities. The council had grown fat and lazy on human solutions to their problems. They had forgotten how to function without constant human input and assistance. Their own skills had grown rusty from disuse. They believed their position was permanent and unshakable. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Dr. Sarah Chen sat in her office aboard Concordia, looking out at the stars through a wide window. In her hands was a report about growing tensions with an aggressive alliance of species beyond council borders. The report recommended immediate action, but she knew the council would debate it for months while the danger grew worse. She sighed quietly and turned back to her desk. Tomorrow would bring another day of serving people who saw her as a useful tool rather than an equal partner. But her patience was not unlimited, and neither was her people's willingness to accept disrespect in exchange for the privilege of helping others. Change was coming to the council, whether they wanted it or not. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was called on a Tuesday morning, when most representatives were still drinking their morning beverages. Dr. Sarah Chen arrived at the council chamber with a thick folder of documents and a grim expression on her face. She had been trying to get this meeting scheduled for 3 months. The threat came from beyond the council's borders, in a region of space controlled by the Vex Hegemony Alliance. The hegemony was made up of 12 aggressive species who believed that might made right. They had been quietly building up their military forces and expanding into neutral territory. Human intelligence networks had been tracking their movements for over a year. Sarah took her seat in the back rows while the ancient species filed into their traditional positions around the central circle. High Speaker Talvin of the Alterans called the session to order, with a musical phrase that roughly translated to, "Let wisdom guide our words." The Zephyrian record keeper, Bright Feather of Dawn, activated the session recorders. The jellyfish-like Mindari floated in their special tanks, ready to sense any deception or hidden motives. "Honored colleagues," Sarah began when given permission to speak. "The situation on our eastern border has become critical. The Vex Hegemony has massed a fleet of over 2,000 warships near the Kepler Nebula. Our intelligence indicates they plan to attack the Harmony system within the next 6 months." She activated a holographic display that showed ship movements, communication intercepts, and resource allocations. The data painted a clear picture of an enemy preparing for war. Human agents had risked their lives to gather this information from deep inside hegemony space. High Speaker Talvin studied the display with his 4 eyes, each blinking at a different rhythm. These are serious accusations, Ambassador Chen. However, the hegemony has always been aggressive in their posturing. This appears to be more of the same intimidation tactics they have used for centuries. With respect, High Speaker, this is different, Sarah replied. They've been recruiting mercenary fleets from the Outer Rim. They've built new shipyards in 12 systems. Most importantly, they've developed new weapons technology that our current defenses cannot handle. She showed them recordings of hegemony test firings. The new weapons could punch through Council shield technology like it was paper. Entire asteroids were vaporized in seconds during the demonstrations. Sarah's analysis indicated that Council border stations would last maybe an hour against this new firepower. Bright Feather of Dawn ruffled her colorful plumage skeptically. Human intelligence has always been prone to exaggeration. Your species sees threats everywhere because you come from a world of constant conflict. Perhaps you are reading too much into normal military exercises. The insult stung, but Sarah kept her voice level. These are not exercises. The hegemony has already moved supply ships into forward positions. They've recalled their diplomatic missions from neutral worlds. All signs point to imminent attack. The Mindari representative, a being called Deep Thought Swimming, pulsed with pale light as it communicated. Its translated words appeared on screens around the chamber. The human ambassador's emotions showed genuine concern, but also underlying aggression. Perhaps her warrior heritage clouds her judgment. We sense a desire for preemptive action that troubles us. That was when Sarah realized the meeting was not going as she had hoped. The ancient species had already made up their minds before hearing the evidence. They saw her warnings not as valuable intelligence, but as proof that humans were too warlike to make good decisions about peace and security. Elder Kresh of the Keith High clicked his mandibles in a pattern that meant dismissal. The human solution to every problem is violence. They suggest we strike first, like the barbarians they descended from. This goes against everything the Council stands for. Sarah felt her patience wearing thin. I'm not suggesting we attack them. I'm saying we need to prepare our defenses and maybe try diplomatic pressure while we still have time. If we wait for them to attack first, thousands of innocent people will die. Thousands die in wars, High Speaker Talvin said, with the tone of someone explaining basic facts to a child. But millions die when civilized beings abandon their principles and act like savages. The Council has maintained peace for 3,000 years by choosing negotiation over aggression. We will not abandon that wisdom because one young species has become frightened of shadows. The debate continued for 6 hours. Sarah presented more evidence, brought in human military experts who explained the technical details of the new hegemony weapons, even showed recordings of hegemony leaders discussing their plans to cleanse the galaxy of Council. Weakness. None of it mattered. The ancient species had decided that humans were being paranoid, warmongers who wanted to drag the Council into an unnecessary conflict. They voted to censure humanity for spreading unfounded panic and promoting inappropriate military responses to diplomatic challenges, but the real blow came with the next vote. Given the human delegation's concerning focus on military solutions, High Speaker Talvin announced, the Council feels it would be wise to remove humans from positions where their aggressive tendencies might cause harm. Effective immediately, all human military commanders will be replaced by officers from more experienced species. Sarah watched in shock as the vote passed, 8-4. Humans lost command of their own ships. Their access to Council intelligence networks was restricted. Their colonies would now be governed by advisory councils, made up of representatives from the ancient species. The final insult came when Elder Kresh announced humanity's new role in the Council. The humans have always shown great talent for preserving knowledge and culture. We assign them to the Cultural Heritage Division, where they can use their skills to catalog and protect the artistic achievements of our great civilizations. Cultural Heritage Division. In other words, they were being made into librarians and museum curators. After 200 years of service, after solving countless problems and preventing 3 wars, humans were being treated like children who needed to be kept busy with safe, harmless tasks. Sarah stood slowly, her folder of intelligence reports still unopened on her desk. The chamber fell quiet as she walked to the central speaking platform. She did not look angry or upset. Her voice was calm and steady when she began to speak. Honored colleagues, when my people first joined this council 200 years ago, we came with hope. We believed we had found something precious. a group of civilizations that could work together despite their differences. We thought we could learn from your wisdom while contributing our own small talents to the greater good. She paused, looking around the circle at the representatives who had just voted to treat her people as second-class citizens. We have served faithfully through peace and crisis. We have shared our discoveries freely. We have bled and died defending Council worlds alongside your own people. We asked for nothing except the chance to be treated as equal partners in this great endeavor. The chamber remained silent. Even the Mindari had stopped their gentle pulsing. Today you have made it clear that equality is not something you are prepared to offer. You see us as useful servants, not as colleagues. You want our labor and our innovation, but not our judgment or our voices in important decisions. Sarah picked up her folder and tucked it under her arm. Therefore, effective immediately, humanity withdraws from active participation in Council affairs. We will honor our existing commitments to individual member species, but we will no longer serve in Council positions or participate in Council decision-making. We leave you to face the challenges ahead with the wisdom and experience that you have repeatedly told us are superior to our own. She walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. Ambassador Chen, High Speaker Talvin called after her. Surely you do not mean to abandon your responsibilities over a simple policy disagreement. Your people have gained much by serving the Council. Sarah stopped at the doorway and turned back one last time. High Speaker, you have just voted to remove us from every position of responsibility we held. There are no longer any responsibilities for us to abandon. As for what we have gained, she smiled sadly, I think we both know who has gained more from this relationship. She left the chamber and did not look back. Within hours, word of humanity's withdrawal spread throughout Council space. Most of the ancient species dismissed it as a temporary tantrum. Humans were too dependent on Council trade and protection to stay away for long. They would come crawling back within a few months, properly humbled and ready to accept their assigned role. None of them noticed the small changes that began almost immediately. Human-operated supply routes started experiencing technical difficulties. Human engineers began requesting transfers away from critical infrastructure projects. Human diplomats quietly canceled meetings and conferences that had been scheduled for months in advance. The Council had gotten exactly what they asked for, a galaxy run by ancient wisdom without human interference. They were about to discover whether that was really what they wanted. The first sign something was wrong came 3 weeks after humanity's withdrawal from the Council. Captain Veldtar of the Alteran merchant vessel Harmony's Dream found himself stranded at the Crossroads station when his usual human fuel supplier failed to show up. Where is the supply ship from Terra Nova? He asked the station manager, a nervous Kethai named Skitterquick. Skitterquick's 8 legs tapped anxiously on the metal floor. The humans said they had technical problems with their refinery. They suggested you try the Zephyrian suppliers on Deck 7. Captain Veldtar was annoyed but not worried. Technical problems happened all the time in space. He went to Deck 7 and found the Zephyrian fuel much more expensive than the human prices he was used to. Still, business was business. He paid the higher price and continued his journey. But when he returned to Crossroads Station 2 weeks later, the human supplier still had technical problems. The week after that, their booth was empty. The week after that, it was rented to a Mindari meditation equipment dealer. Similar scenes played out across Council space. Human businesses that had operated reliably for decades suddenly developed problems. Computer systems failed at inconvenient times. Supply chains that had run smoothly for generations began experiencing delays and shortages. Medical facilities run by human doctors started closing for equipment maintenance that seemed to last forever. At first, the ancient species barely noticed. They had managed their affairs for thousands of years before humans arrived. Surely they could handle a few minor disruptions while the young species threw their tantrum. High Speaker Talvin received daily reports about the small problems affecting Council operations. Ships arriving late, communication systems needing repair, trade routes operating at reduced capacity. None of it seemed serious enough to worry about. The humans will return soon enough, he told his advisors during their weekly meeting. They need Council protection and Council markets. This withdrawal is merely a negotiating tactic. We must show them that the Council cannot be manipulated by emotional outbursts. But deep thought swimming of the Mindari was beginning to sense something troubling in the patterns of disruption. The problems were not random. They affected specific systems that humans had designed or maintained. It was as if someone was carefully removing all human influence from council space, one piece at a time. The Mindari representative tried to share these concerns with the other council members, but its warnings were dismissed. The ancient species were proud of their wisdom and experience. They refused to believe that losing one junior member could seriously damage their civilization. Meanwhile, the human exodus continued in silence. Dr. Sarah Chen had returned to Earth immediately after her final speech to the council. She met with the human leadership in Geneva, in the same building where Earth's first starship crews had been selected 3 centuries earlier. The room was filled with admirals, scientists, diplomats, and colony governors who had spent their lives serving the council cause. The vote was unanimous, Sarah reported. Humanity withdraws from all council activities effective immediately. We honor our existing contracts with individual species, but we make no new commitments. All humans in council space are to return home within 6 months. Admiral Marcus Torres, commander of the human fleet, raised his hand. What about our defense obligations? We have treaties to protect 17 council worlds. The council has made it clear they no longer want our military services, Sarah replied. They voted to remove human commanders from their own ships. I think we can assume they prefer to handle their own defense. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, director of the Human Medical Corps, looked troubled. My people are treating patients on 47 different worlds. Some of them will die if we leave. Sarah's expression softened. Anyone who wants to stay and continue their work may do so as a private citizen. But they will no longer represent humanity or receive support from human institutions. The council wanted to treat us as individuals rather than equals. Now they will get exactly that. The meeting continued for 12 hours as humanity's leaders planned the most complex evacuation in their history. 2 million humans lived and worked throughout council space. Most of them had spent their entire careers serving the council. Now they were being asked to abandon everything they had built and return to human space. Surprisingly, most of them agreed without complaint. On the colony world of New Harmony, Governor Lisa Park called a meeting of all 30,000 human residents. She expected protests, demands to stay, angry questions about why they had to suffer for the council's political decisions. Instead, she found a room full of people who had been waiting for this moment for years. I'm tired of being treated like a smart pet, said Dr. James Wu, who ran the colony's Agricultural Research Center. Every breakthrough we make gets credited to council science, while they pat us on the head and tell us how clever we are. Engineer Maria Santos nodded agreement. I've been designing starship engines for 20 years. My Alteran supervisor still explains basic physics to me like I'm a first-year student. I'm ready to go home and work with people who respect what I do. The sentiment was the same on human colonies throughout council space. People packed their belongings, sold their homes, and boarded transport ships headed for Earth and the other human worlds. They left behind roads they had built, hospitals they had staffed, schools they had taught in, and research stations they had operated. What they didn't leave behind was the knowledge in their heads. The Zephyrians were the first to notice something seriously wrong. Their perfect memory allowed them to track exactly how different systems had operated before and after human involvement. What they discovered was alarming. Bright Feather of Dawn presented her findings to an emergency session of the Council's Technical Advisory Committee. Human contributions to our infrastructure were far more extensive than we realized. They didn't just work on human projects. They improved and maintained systems throughout council space. She displayed a holographic map showing council territory. Red markers indicated facilities that were now operating below normal capacity. Yellow markers showed systems that were failing more often than usual. Green markers indicated operations that were still functioning normally. The map was mostly red and yellow. The humans embedded themselves in our technology, Bright Feather of Dawn explained. Not through sabotage or espionage, but through competence. They solved problems and made improvements wherever they worked. Now that they're gone, we're discovering how much we depended on their knowledge and skills. The Crossroads station, where Captain Veltar had experienced his first fuel shortage, was experiencing worse problems every week. The station's computer systems, originally designed by Zephyrians but upgraded by human engineers over the decades, were failing one by one. The artificial gravity fluctuated unpredictably. Life support systems shut down without warning. Waste processing backed up and created health hazards. Station manager Skitter Quick sent increasingly desperate requests for technical support to the Council Engineering Department. The responses were always the same. Engineering teams are currently occupied with higher priority assignments. Please submit a detailed technical report and wait for scheduling availability. What Skitter Quick didn't know was that the Council Engineering Department was overwhelmed with similar requests from across their territory. Systems that had run smoothly for decades were breaking down faster than the ancient species could fix them. The Alterans were methodical but slow. The Zephyrians were precise but inflexible. The Mindari were wise but impractical. None of them had the human talent for quick, creative solutions to unexpected problems. Dr. Sarah Chen watched the situation develop from her new office on Earth. Intelligence reports from human agents still working in Council space painted a picture of growing chaos. She felt no satisfaction at the Council's struggles. These were people she had worked with for 30 years. Colleagues she had respected despite their prejudices, but she also felt no obligation to help them. The humans had tried to warn the Council about the Vex Hegemony threat. They had been ignored and insulted for their efforts. Now the ancient species would have to face that threat with their own resources and their own wisdom. Meanwhile, humanity had its own plans to make. The withdrawal from Council space was only the first phase of a larger strategy that had been developing quietly for decades. Human exploration ships had been mapping regions far beyond Council territory, making contact with other civilizations, discovering new technologies and new possibilities. The Council had always assumed that humans needed them more than they needed humans. They were about to learn how wrong that assumption was. In the outer rim of Council space, near the border with the Vex Hegemony, automated monitoring stations began detecting strange energy signatures. Ships were moving in the dark between star systems, too far away to identify clearly but definitely not using any technology the Council recognized. The Hegemony had noticed the activity too. Their own scouts reported massive fleet movements in the neutral zone, but they couldn't determine who was responsible or what they were planning. The energy signatures didn't match any known Council design. High Speaker Talvin received these reports with growing concern. First, the human withdrawal had disrupted Council OP. The attack came on a quiet Thursday morning when the Council's border monitoring stations were still struggling with the system failures that had plagued them for months. Automated sensors that should have detected the approaching Vex Hegemony fleet had been offline for repairs. Communication arrays that might have warned the inner systems were running on backup power after their primary generators failed. Commander Zekval of the border station Perseus 7 was trying to fix a coffee machine when his tactical officer started screaming, "Sir, multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace. By the stars, there are hundreds of them." Zekval ran to the command center and saw the tactical display lighting up with red dots like a disease spreading across the screen. Vex Hegemony warships were emerging from hyperspace in perfect formation, their hulls black and angular like predators designed for killing. "How many?" he asked, though he already knew the answer would be bad. 2,300 confirmed contacts and still counting, his sensor operator reported. "They're deploying an attack formation across the entire border zone." Zekval's hands shook as he tried to activate the emergency communications system. The humans had warned about this exact scenario 6 months ago. Dr. Sarah Chen had shown the Council intelligence about hegemony fleet movements and new weapon systems. The ancient species had dismissed her warnings as warmongering. Now those warnings were coming true. The communication system finally connected to Council headquarters on Concordia. High Speaker Talvin appeared on the screen, his 4 eyes blinking in the rhythm that meant confusion and stress. "Commander Zekval, we are receiving reports of technical malfunctions at multiple border stations. Please confirm your status." "High Speaker, this is not a malfunction. The Vex Hegemony has launched a full-scale invasion. I count over 2,000 warships approaching our borders. They'll be in weapons range within 3 hours. Talvin's silver skin went pale. "That's impossible. Our intelligence indicates the hegemony is still engaged in internal political disputes. They wouldn't risk a major offensive at this time. Sir, I'm transmitting tactical data now. You can see for yourself." The data reached Concordia and spread through the Council's command structure like wildfire. Ancient species who had known only peace for centuries suddenly faced the reality of war. The Vex Hegemony had chosen to strike while the Council was weakened by the loss of human support systems. Emergency sessions were called. Fleet commanders dusted off battle plans that hadn't been updated in decades. Defense stations that relied on human-maintained systems scrambled to find replacement parts and technical expertise. The Council's response was exactly what Dr. Sarah Chen had predicted it would be. Too little, too late, and badly coordinated. The Alterran fleet was the first to engage the enemy near the Harmony system. Admiral Velkin commanded 12 massive battleships that had been the pride of the Council Navy for over a century. Their shields could absorb tremendous damage. Their weapons could destroy asteroids. Their crews were trained in the finest traditions of space warfare. They lasted 18 minutes. The Vex Hegemony's new weapons cut through Council shields like they weren't there. Energy beams that should have been absorbed or deflected went straight through and carved the Alterran ships into pieces. The ancient, dignified vessels exploded in silent fireballs that could be seen from the surface of nearby planets. Admiral Velkan's final transmission was picked up by monitoring stations throughout Council space. Their weapons. We have no defense. Warn the others. Warn. The transmission cut off as his flagship disappeared in a flash of nuclear fire. News of the defeat spread through Council territory faster than the invasion fleet itself. Panic followed close behind. Worlds that had known peace for millennia suddenly faced the prospect of orbital bombardment and occupation. Civilian populations tried to evacuate, but the transport systems were still struggling with the problems caused by the human withdrawal. On the trading world of Keth Prime, millions of spider-like Kethi tried to flee on ships that hadn't been properly maintained in months. Half the vessels broke down before leaving the star system. The others were packed so tightly with refugees that life support systems began failing during the journey. The Zephyrian colony of Bright Wing suffered similar chaos. Their famous archives, containing the complete history of Council civilization, were hastily loaded onto cargo ships while Vex scouts probed the outer edges of their system. Some of the most precious historical records were lost when panicked workers dropped storage containers in their rush to escape. High Speaker Talavan tried to coordinate the Council's defense from his office on Concordia, but the communication systems kept failing at critical moments. Reports came in fragments and pieces. Fleet positions were unclear. Resource allocations were hopelessly confused. Orders were delayed or never delivered at all. The ancient species discovered that they had forgotten how to fight a real war. Their tactics were thousands of years old, designed for formal battles between honorable opponents who followed recognized rules. The Vex Hegemony followed no rules except victory at any cost. Where Council fleets tried to form traditional battle lines, Hegemony ships used hit-and-run attacks that picked off isolated vessels. Where Council commanders issued formal challenges to enemy leaders, Hegemony forces simply opened fire without warning. Where Council protocols called for protecting civilian populations, Hegemony doctrine targeted them specifically to create fear and chaos. Deep Thought Swimming of the Mindari tried to use its telepathic abilities to coordinate the defense, but the mental noise of billions of panicking civilians overwhelmed its consciousness. The great philosopher beings who had guided Council policy for centuries found themselves paralyzed by the emotional chaos of war. Within 2 weeks, the Hegemony had conquered 17 Council worlds and was advancing toward the core systems. Their fleet had grown to over 3,000 ships as reinforcements arrived from their home territory. Council resistance was collapsing faster than anyone had thought possible. The breaking point came when the Hegemony attacked Concordia itself. The great space station had been built to be a symbol of peace and cooperation, not a fortress. Its defenses were purely ceremonial, designed to prevent accidents rather than repel military attacks. When Vex Hegemony warships dropped out of hyperspace around the station, the battle was over before it began. High Speaker Talvin stood in the Council chamber where humanity had been censured and dismissed 6 months earlier. Through the great windows he could see enemy ships closing in from all directions. Their weapons were already charging for the killing blow. "Send a message to all Council worlds," he told his communications officer. "The Galactic Council of Civilizations hereby surrenders unconditionally to the Vex Hegemony Alliance. All military units are ordered to stand down. All member worlds are instructed to comply with Hegemony occupation forces. The message went out across Council space as Concordia's lights flickered and failed. The great station that had been the heart of galactic civilization for 3,000 years was now under enemy control. But the surrender didn't bring peace. The ancient species quickly learned that the Vex Hegemony had no interest in governing the territories they conquered. They wanted to strip each world of its resources and population before moving on to the next target. Alteran philosophers were executed as dangerous intellectuals. Zephyrian historians were enslaved to catalog the wealth of conquered worlds. Kethite traders were forced to work in hegemony factories under conditions that killed half of them within months. The Council's member species began to turn on each other as their civilization collapsed. The Alterans blamed the Zephyrians for keeping faulty intelligence records. The Zephyrians blamed the Kethai for prioritizing profit over proper military preparation. Everyone blamed the Mindari for giving philosophical advice instead of practical solutions. But more and more, they found themselves thinking about the humans who had tried to warn them. Dr. Sarah Chen had presented clear evidence of the hegemony threat. Human intelligence networks had tracked enemy movements and weapon development. Human military experts had offered specific recommendations for improving Council defenses. All of it had been dismissed as warmongering by primitive minds. Now those primitive minds were nowhere to be found. High Speaker Talvin, now a prisoner in his own office under hegemony guard, tried repeatedly to contact Earth or any human colony. The communication equipment still worked, but there was no answer from any human world. It was as if humanity had simply vanished from the galaxy. Some Council survivors whispered that the humans had abandoned them out of spite. Others believed they had been destroyed by some unknown enemy. A few wondered if humanity had found somewhere else to go, somewhere beyond the reach of both the Council and the hegemony. The truth was more disturbing than any of them imagined, deep thought swimming. One of the few Mindari to survive the initial conquest managed to make contact with a human research station that had been abandoned months earlier. The station's automated systems were still functional, and they contained recordings of human activity right up until the evacuation. What the Mindari found in those recordings changed everything they thought. The first sign that everything was about to change came from the outer rim sensors of a Vex Hegemony patrol fleet. Commander Thexfor was reviewing casualty reports from the latest pacification operation on a former Council world when his sensor operator made a sound of confusion. "Sir, I'm detecting multiple energy signatures dropping out of hyperspace. But the readings don't match any known ship designs." Thexfor looked at the tactical display and frowned. 12 contacts had appeared near the edge of his patrol zone, but they were moving in ways that should have been impossible. Ships didn't drift sideways through space like leaves on water. They didn't pulse with energy patterns that seemed almost alive. "Identify them," he ordered. "I can't, sir. The computer doesn't recognize the technology signatures. The ships appear to be organic in nature, but they're clearly artificial constructs. And, sir, they're not responding to our challenges." Before Thexfor could respond, his communications officer started receiving a transmission on frequencies the hegemony hadn't known existed. The message came through in perfect Vex, spoken by a voice that sounded human but carried undertones of something much older and deeper. "Vex Hegemony forces in the Kepler sector. This is Admiral Elena Vasquez of the Terran Federation. You are operating in violation of territorial sovereignty and interstellar law. Withdraw your forces immediately or face the consequences." Thexfor almost laughed. The humans had been missing for months, probably hiding in some distant corner of space while their former allies were crushed. Now 12 ships wanted to challenge a hegemony fleet of 200 vessels. "Human Admiral," he replied, "you are in no position to make demands. The Council has surrendered. This territory belongs to the Vex Hegemony. Surrender your ships or be destroyed." The response came immediately. "Commander, you have 30 seconds to begin withdrawal. This is your only warning." Thexfor looked at his tactical officer. "Fire on the lead human vessel. Show them what happens to species that challenge the hegemony." The Vex warship's main cannon charged and fired, sending a beam of energy that could vaporize an asteroid toward the nearest human ship. The beam struck the target dead center and did absolutely nothing. The human vessel absorbed the energy like it was sunlight, then pulsed once with a soft blue glow. When the light faded, Thexvor's ship was no longer a ship. It was a cloud of component atoms drifting in space, its crew scattered to the cosmic wind without time to scream. The remaining hegemony vessels opened fire with everything they had. Energy beams, missile barrages, gravity weapons that could crush planets. All of it struck the human ships and vanished like raindrops hitting an ocean. Then the humans began to respond. They didn't fire weapons in any recognizable sense. Instead, hegemony ships simply stopped existing. One moment they were there, guns blazing and engines roaring. The next moment they were gone, leaving behind only empty space and confused radio chatter. Within 5 minutes, a hegemony fleet of 200 warships had been reduced to cosmic dust by 12 human vessels that barely seemed to notice the battle was happening. News of the impossible defeat spread through hegemony command networks at the speed of light. Similar reports came in from other sectors as more human ships appeared throughout the occupied territories. The technology they displayed was beyond anything the hegemony had ever encountered. On the conquered world of Altair Prime, High Commander Grixmoth was interrogating captured council leaders when reality seemed to bend around him. The air shimmered, space twisted, and suddenly there were humans in his command center. Not human soldiers with guns and armor, but ordinary-looking people in simple clothes who had somehow walked through solid walls. "High Commander," said a middle-aged human woman with graying hair. "My name is Dr. Sarah Chen. I believe we need to talk." Griximoth reached for his sidearm but found his hand wouldn't move. Neither would his legs or his head or any other part of his body. He was frozen in place like a statue while the humans moved around his command center as if they owned it. "How?" he managed to ask through paralyzed lips. "Your species understands force," Dr. Chen replied, checking a device that looked like a crystal smartphone. "Mine has learned to understand the fundamental structures of reality itself. We've been away for a while, learning from teachers whose civilizations are older than your entire galaxy." She touched another control, and suddenly every hegemony soldier on the planet found themselves standing in empty fields far from any population center. Their weapons were gone. Their vehicles were gone. They were alone and confused but unharmed. "The occupation of this world is over," Dr. Chen announced to the former prisoners in the command center. "Hegemony forces have been relocated to unpopulated areas where they can consider their situation without threatening anyone else." High Speaker Talvin, who had been chained to a wall for 3 months, looked at the human woman who had once served as his species' junior partner. She seemed the same, but there was something different in her eyes. A depth that spoke of experiences beyond anything the council races had ever imagined. "Dr. Chen," he said quietly, We were wrong about your warnings. The hegemony did exactly what you predicted. We should have listened," Sarah smiled sadly. "Yes, you should have. But that's not why I'm here." Similar scenes played out across the occupied territories. Hegemony fleets simply vanished or found themselves transported to distant, empty systems. Occupation forces were relocated with casual ease that defied all known laws of physics. Prison camps were emptied and their guards deposited safely on uninhabited moons. The Vex Hegemony's military might, which had seemed unstoppable just days before, proved helpless against technology that operated on principles they couldn't even comprehend. Within a week, every hegemony ship had been removed from former council space. The invaders weren't destroyed or humiliated. They were simply set aside, like children whose toys had been taken away for misbehaving. But humanity didn't restore the old order. When representatives of the surviving council species gathered on the rebuilt Concordia station, they found a very different Dr. Sarah Chen waiting for them. She wore the same simple clothes, carried herself with the same quiet dignity, but she was no longer alone. Behind her stood humans who seemed to flicker between dimensions, who spoke in harmonics that suggested vast knowledge, who carried themselves like people who had seen wonders beyond imagination. "Friends," Sarah began, using the old council form of address, "humanity has returned to this region of space, but we have not returned as we were." She activated a holographic display that showed star charts extending far beyond the galaxy's edge. Points of light marked civilizations older than time, species that had transcended physical existence, technologies that could reshape reality with a thought. While you debated and the hegemony conquered, we explored. We found teachers among the ruins of civilizations that fell before your species learned to make fire. We discovered allies who measure time in geological ages. We learned that the universe is far stranger and more wonderful than any of us ever imagined. The ancient species listened in stunned silence as Sarah described humanity's journey beyond the known galaxy. They had contacted the architects, beings of pure energy who had built the cosmic web itself. They had studied with the gardeners, who seeded life throughout the universe billions of years ago. They had learned from the Watchers who observed the rise and fall of entire galactic civilizations. We return not as conquerors or saviors, Sarah continued, but as inheritors of knowledge that we wish to share. The universe is preparing for changes that will affect every living being. New threats and new opportunities are emerging from the deep void, the old ways of thinking, the old divisions between species, the old competitions for resources and territory. All of that is ending, she gestured, and the holographic display showed images of cosmic phenomena beyond description, dark energies that could devour galaxies, ancient machines awakening after eons of sleep, gateways opening to dimensions where different laws of physics applied. We offer membership in something greater than the Council ever was, a federation of species united not by treaties or trade agreements, but by shared understanding of our place in the cosmic order. Some of you will join us and learn to see the universe as we now see it. Others will choose their own paths, and we will respect those choices. High Speaker Talvin raised a trembling hand. Dr. Chen. Ambassador Chen, what do you require of us? Sarah's expression softened with something that might have been pity. Nothing, High Speaker. That's the point. We're not here to rule you or guide you or solve your problems for you. We're here to offer you the chance to grow beyond what you've always been. She turned to address all the assembled representatives. The Galactic Council of Civilizations died when the Hegemony conquered Concordia. What rises from its ashes is up to you. You can rebuild the same old system with the same old prejudices and limitations, or you can join us in becoming something new. Over the following months, the response varied by species. Some, like the Mindari, eagerly embraced the opportunity to learn from humanity's cosmic teachers. Their natural telepathic abilities combined with human shared knowledge allowed them to transcend physical existence entirely. They became beings of pure thought,